going to turn this off so we don't have a problem later. All right, can you hear me now? Hey! All right. You want me to leave it on? All right. There you go. Well, it's probably not going to be 5 minutes, but all right. So, got that solved. Good to be with you all today. I'm so glad they're here. I am Pastor Brett Stevens. I'm the discipleship pastor here. And it is my pleasure to be preaching to you today. We are talking through this series, Better. The idea here is we make resolutions as we come in to the new year. It's just kind of a part of our culture, this idea of striving, wanting to be better. But a lot of resolutions don't exactly produce the things we're hoping for. They sometimes leave us even frustrated or disappointed. And so today we're going to be talking about different ways, or this whole series really, but that we are moving forward in ways that will not leave us frustrated, will not leave us disappointed. Now, there is a message that if you have spent any significant length of time in the church, you have heard, probably a lot. And this is the message, that we are saved by faith alone. Now, if you heard that, I'm going to explain it anyway, just to make sure we're all on the same page about what we mean by that. Because some people here may not have heard this message a lot. You may not have grown up in the church. You may not have spent a lot of time here. And so when we say we're saved by faith alone, what we mean is there is no amount of good works that we can do. There's no action that we can take, no choices that we can make in our life that will be effective, that will be sufficient to make us right with God. That we are stuck in this state of sort of being separated from him, of being unable to please him, being unable to connect with him. But because of the person of Jesus Christ, we can believe in what he has done and be able to restore that relationship. That's what we mean when we say we are saved by faith alone. Now, anyone who has been outside of the church and looked at church people has probably heard a different message. And what I mean by that is this. They have heard the words that we say, but when they look at our lives, when they look at the other things we preach, what the message they hear is, if you are a Christian, you have to do this, that, and I'm supposed to pass this off now? Are we good? All right, yes. So they hear messages like, if you're a Christian, if you're a good person, you won't drink. You won't swear. Maybe you won't go dancing. And the list goes on. They hear messages about the things that a good person should and shouldn't do. And so they hear that message. They say, you're saved by faith alone, but you spend an awful lot of time talking about all these other things that we're not allowed to do. And in fact, sometimes we will even suggest or outright claim that certain behaviors, certain actions disqualify you from being saved. And the message that people outside the church hear is, you say saved by faith, but what you mean is saved by works, by doing these good things and not doing these bad things. And we inside the church have kind of a difficult relationship here. Because on the one hand, we acknowledge that we can't save ourselves. This is a message that is fundamental to our faith. But on the other hand, we also acknowledge that the whole of the Bible provides a number of different guidelines for how to live. That there are things that we are and aren't supposed to do. And so there is this pull, this tension between faith and between works, between grace and works. And how do we resolve this? Well, I hope to give you some principles to understand this. But before we do that, I want to turn to the book of Matthew. And the book of Matthew will help lay out some ideas, but as we turn here, I want to lay a foundation to understand what's going on in this text. And the reason why is because there's kind of this unusual principle. So the principle itself is not unusual. When we're reading the Bible, to understand the Bible, we try to think about what it meant to the people it was written to. Right? That makes sense. The message that is, to understand the message, we have to understand what's going on, what's happening in this. In this particular passage, the challenge is that there are two audiences. I know this might sound weird, but it's really not. Think of it like this. Imagine you're reading a novel about somebody writing a letter, right? So for example, C.S. Lewis wrote a book called The Screwtape Letters. And in The Screwtape Letters, the entire novel is a written correspondence between two individuals. So there is one audience, right? The person writing the letter is writing to somebody in the story. But you are being given a book about a letter being written. And you are supposed to be reading that book. In other words, you are an audience. That book was written for you. The same is true here. What we're reading is called a gospel. And what that means is basically somebody who saw Jesus' life, personally experienced Jesus' life, wrote down a lot of the things that he did. But this isn't a pure biography in the sense that the person who did not say, I want to recount every single detail that I can remember of Jesus' life and work. Instead, what they said is, Jesus' life and Jesus' work was so profound, so amazing, so inspiring, that it can transform other people's lives. And I'm right, I know this group of people who want to be like Jesus. They want to follow Jesus, and they need some guidance. They need to be inspired by his life. But the things that will inspire them might be different than the things that would inspire these other people. And so they wrote this biography, this true history, with an emphasis on the things that would be most inspirational to a group of people. And so here we have the Gospel of Matthew. This was written by a man named Matthew. And Matthew was writing to people who were Jewish. And Matthew was writing to these people who were familiar with Jewish law. And they were serious about Jewish law, that this was important to them. Their whole life, until they came to know about Jesus, was focused on keeping the law. And so he wrote this gospel for them, this message about Jesus' life. He said, you've been following the Jewish law your whole life, and now you want to follow Jesus, and you're trying to figure out, how do I do that? What does that look like? And Matthew's saying, let me tell you about Jesus' life in a way that will give you some insight. And so here we have this. And this is from a famous sermon that he preached. We call it the Sermon on the Mount. And he is giving this message, Jesus is, to a bunch of people who have come out to hear what he has to say. And Matthew's writing this down because he believes that this message is helpful for people who are trying to follow Jesus. This is Jesus speaking. You are the salt of the earth. But what good is salt if it has lost its flavor? Can you make it salty again? It will be thrown out and trampled underfoot as worthless. You are the light of the world, like a city on a hilltop that cannot be hidden. No one lights a lamp and then puts it under a basket. Instead, a lamp is placed on a stand where it gives light to everyone in the house. In the same way, let your good deeds shine out for all to see, so that everyone will praise your heavenly Father. And now, this is an unusual passage for us to read today, because salt and light aren't important to us in the same way as they were in the ancient world. And what I mean by that is both are ubiquitous. They are everywhere. Table salt is cheap. It's really easy to get. And in fact, almost everything you buy from the store has salt in it, right? So salt is everywhere. It's easy to get salt. The same way with light. Very rarely will any of us be in a situation where we are lacking for access to light. If the lights go out in our house, chances are you have flashlights and batteries, multiple, in your house. You probably have access to multiple candles, too. In fact, some of us just collect candles without lighting them because they smell good. Right? Our access to light is very different. But in the ancient world, light primarily came by burning oil. Oil came from pressing olives. And so you can see how this would be a limited supply. Olives don't grow all year round. So you have to grow enough olives, get enough oil to have light all the time. The same way with salt. The way they got salt, there are a few different ways. The most common way in Jesus' day was down by the ocean or the sea. They would dig these pits, these shallow pits, and then carve a channel, and seawater would come in when the tide came in. And then when the tide went out, it would go out and leave water in the pit. And then sun would beat down on this shallow water, and the water would evaporate, and it would leave salt behind. Sounds like a process that takes a little while. It does. Also, it means the only people who have easy access to salt are people who live by the sea. Everyone else has to have it transported and buy it. So salt was not as common. It was not as easy, but it was crucial. Everyone needed salt for the very simple reason that refrigeration didn't exist. So if you want your food to last any extended period of time, you need salt. In fact, salt has been described as the foundation of civilization because it allows people to transition from following their food sources to staying in one place. So salt is critical. Salt is this resource that is incredibly valuable. And so when Jesus equates people who follow him to salt, he's saying, you have an incredible value, an incredible influence on your society. That you, by your very existence, stand out. You are a unique flavor. But not only that, you are necessary to keep it healthy, to make it edible, sustainable, livable. Because without salt, there is no preservation of food. Without salt, the food is more bland. The other metaphor he uses, light. In the ancient world, light was very important because you needed light to see during the night. Today, light is everywhere. You go out at night and there's headlights and there's street lights and it's bright. It's bright outside. In fact, we now have a term called light pollution because there's so much light, it's hard to see the sky at night. That was not the case in the ancient world. In the ancient world, when the sun went down, it got very dark, and you needed light to be able to see. If you were outside for any reason when it was dark, you needed light to not get lost. But there were certain places that still had a significant amount of light. And so these places, cities and things like that could produce larger lights by burning bigger fires, would try to elevate those fires so that people could see them. In the same way, if you were in your house, right, burning oil, expensive to light your house. So you're not going to light a light everywhere in your house. You're going to light one light and put it somewhere that everyone can see it. So Jesus is saying this: in a world that is dark, in a world that can't find its way, you are a light. You are a guide. And what is the light, he says? Your good deeds. And this establishes this idea that Jesus expected those who followed him to be signified, to be distinct, to stand out by how they lived. But this doesn't quite address the question, right? You say, okay, but that still sounds like we're saved by what we do. We'll get there, but let's keep going. Don't misunderstand why I have come. This is Jesus still speaking. I did not come to abolish the law of Moses or the writings of the prophets. I came to accomplish their purpose. I tell you the truth. Until heaven and earth disappear, not the smallest detail of God's law will disappear until its purpose is achieved. So if you ignore the least commandment and teach others to do the same, you will be called least in the kingdom of heaven. But if anyone disobeys God's law and teaches, anyone who obeys God's law and teaches them will be called great in the kingdom of heaven. I think I wanted one more verse. I may have accidentally put that in there. I apologize. But I warn you, unless your righteousness is better than the righteousness of the teachers of religious law and the Pharisees, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. And so this passage is a complicated one. And I don't have time to go into fully flesh out what he means here. But the point I will highlight here is he's saying the law doesn't just go away. It's not just a free-for-all. You're saved by grace. It doesn't matter anymore. That's not his message. That was never his message. That was not the message his followers understood. But he ends with this very curious phrase, unless your righteousness exceeds that of the Pharisees and the teachers of the law, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. Now, who were the Pharisees? They were this very strict religious Jewish sect. So they were a group of Jews who had a very strict interpretation of the law. They were very, very diligent in how they followed the commands of the law. But interestingly, important to note, because in our day, the primary text we use to think about the Pharisees comes from the Bible, and the Bible is almost universally negative on the Pharisees. So you might get this impression that everyone hated them, that they were going around like shaking their finger at people and everyone felt bad. But that was not the case. For one thing, the Pharisees typically were not rich. And what I mean by that is there's another group of people called the Sadducees who were largely rich. And so they were viewed a little differently because most people are like ordinary people just trying to keep the law. And they would look at the Sadducees and be like, yeah, whatever, like you guys live in a different world than us. The Pharisees didn't live in a different world. They were heroes to people because they were looked at as these people who were ordinary, hardworking, diligent, faithful people who were so devout, so sincere. So they were looked up to. And so when Jesus says this, he is saying something that is like blowing people's minds. They're like, how can I be more righteous than those guys? Look at them. And that was his point. You're looking at the wrong metric. You're viewing it the wrong way. So their way of looking at it was they looked at the law and they said, it says this. So what I'm going to do, right, if I imagine this small circle, this is the command of the law. Don't step inside the circle. And they say, that's, I don't want to accidentally, like there's some confusing messages. So for example, there's a law that says, don't boil a goat in its mother's milk. And that's very specific, but a little strange. And they say, well, how do you make sure that you didn't get its mother's milk? The best solution, guys, don't eat dairy and meat in the same meal. And then it will never, ever happen. And that was their solution, right? You have the small circle is the law. Let's make a bigger circle around it and say, everyone, don't get in the big circle. This is the law. Don't get in the big circle. And that way you'll never even get close to the small circle. That was their solution. And so this became very, very focused on specific actions. And so they had these debates. What constitutes work, right? We're not supposed to work on the Sabbath. What constitutes work? How many steps constitute work? How heavy of a load constitutes work? Those are good questions. We've got to figure it out. Well, there's a message, don't take the name of the Lord in vain. And this is connected with swearing oaths, right? And so they say, okay, so how do I swear an oath in the right way? What are the things that are acceptable to swear on versus unacceptable? And these were the kinds of debates that they had. And this is where Jesus is focusing. He's saying, that's the wrong question. You're looking at it the wrong way. What you're looking for is a checklist of do's and don'ts. And incidentally, when people focus on a checklist of do's and don'ts, they start looking outward, right? This is the reality. This is what, if any of you have ever felt judged by someone religiously, I'm sure this has been your experience. That they look at their checklist of do's and don'ts, and they start looking at you and saying, are you following my checklist of do's and don'ts? Nope, not doing that one, not doing that one, bad, 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 bad. That was the perception that people had, that they couldn't live up to that standard. And Jesus is saying, they're setting the wrong standard. But the problem continues today. People outside the church look at us, and that's what they feel. The wrong standard. So what's the answer? What's the answer? Well, let me give you some principles. And here's the first one. What you do points to why you do it. What you do points to why you do it. So Jesus' message, let your good deeds shine before others so that they may glorify your Father in heaven. What you do points to why you do it. This is critical Because if what you do becomes about what you do, if that becomes the end goal, you've missed the mark. You focused on the wrong metric. Instead, what you do points to why you do it. And we recognize this truth sort of intrinsically, right? So, for example, and I don't want to dive into the, please don't take this as a political commentary, but there was recently a law proposed in Texas floating the idea of the death penalty for abortion. Now, however you feel about abortion, you can recognize that there is an odd disconnect between someone saying, I value life so much that I'm going to kill you if you do the wrong thing. Right? There's a disconnect there. That someone can say, do you value life? Really? Again, however you feel about this, however strongly you feel, you can see the disconnect between a belief in the value of life and the death penalty. What you do points to why you do it. So people will look at that. People who disagree will look at that and be like, I don't believe that you value life. Your actions don't agree with your belief. What you do points to why you do it. The same could be said in much more benign areas in life. If you look outside and you see storm clouds and you tell someone in your family, I think it's going to rain today, and then you promptly walk out without your coat and umbrella, do they really think that you believe it's going to rain? They say, well, you must not be that concerned about it, right? What you do points to why you do it. Let me say this another way for you. It'll come up here. Your actions demonstrate your beliefs. But that's a simpler way to say it. Your actions demonstrate your beliefs. And so, the point here is not, if you do these things, you will be saved. The point is, when we follow God, we acknowledge that we believe certain things. And therefore, if we believe them, we should act on them. But do you see how that's different than you must do these things to be good, to be saved, to be right with God? Those are two different ways of looking at it. This is the message that people have received from the church. That if you do the wrong things, you aren't a good person, you aren't saved, you can never know God. Versus, I love God. I believe that Jesus came to save us. And I believe that Jesus knows the best way to live. So I'm going to follow what he said because I believe it. Those are two different ways of presenting that. So that's one principle here. Your actions demonstrate your beliefs. And here's the second. Grace is the beginning, not the end. Grace is the beginning, not the end. And here's what I mean. When we say we are saved by faith alone, what we mean by saved is that by grace alone, we start our relationship with God. We start our relationship with God. Now, you all have lots of relationships in your life. And you can think about the way that your relationships with somebody develop. They might start by happenstance. This person you ran into someday and you've just known for a long time. They might start by intention. You find someone interesting or attractive and you want to have a relationship with them. They might start by sort of controlled factors but that you didn't specifically plan on, as in the relationship you might have with a professor or work colleague. You didn't plan on them, but situations brought you into a specific relationship, and your relationship develops from there. In all of these cases, your relationship starts somewhere, but it continues through investment. And I suspect you all have had the experience of a relationship that was broken by actions, by choices, by decisions that were made. And so again, you can see the critical point here. It's not that you are saved by your actions, but your actions are a significant part of the development of your relationships. And this is no different
if your relationship with God. So those of you who say, I follow Jesus, one, your actions should demonstrate your belief in who Jesus is and what he does. And two, while you were saved by your faith in Jesus, your continued relationship with him is something that requires your investment. It requires you to do and be and live in certain ways. And for those of you who don't follow Jesus, who aren't sure about this, the invitation is there to understand more fully what we mean by being saved by faith and what exactly we mean when we talk about the importance of how we live our lives and why we live our lives this way. And I hope that this has been made clear to you, that you see this is not about us trying to be perfect. This is not about us trying to be better than people. This is about us trying to be better for ourselves. A task we've not always succeeded at, but we continue to strive. And this is the other crucial point about the message that grace is the beginning and not the end. It's not going to happen overnight. It's not going to be right the first time. It is a continual progress to follow, to live better, to live closer. And so this is our challenge. This is our tension, right, between our grace and our works. But the two don't have to be in tension. They work together. That what we begin by grace, what we begin by faith, we continue because of love, because of a sincere belief. Grace alone, grace that gives us freedom to do whatever we want, is irresponsible. To be responsible with grace is to move from grace into a mature life, a changed life. And this is the invitation to be changed. Let me pray for you. God in heaven, you are so good. You have been faithful to reach out to us when we were lost, blind, and confused. And you want so much more for us. Today, will you give us new wisdom, new insight that we can grow to follow you? We pray this in the holy name of your Son, Jesus. Amen.